Hello, welcome to Polaris SENDIASS. We support children, young people, and their parent carers in Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, and the London boroughs of Richmond and Kingston. In this video, I'm going to take you through the SEND 35A form and explain how to complete each section. This is the form for anyone who wants to lodge an appeal against a refusal to complete an education, health and care needs assessment of a child or young person. Please note that for any other appeals, including refusals to issue education, health and care plans, decisions to cease education, health and care plans, or any appeal about the contents or placement in an education, health and care plan, this is not the appeal form that you need. The form you need is the SEND 35 form. Here are the links to the two forms I mentioned. So the SEND 35A form that we're going to go through today is at the top of the page, and all other appeals can be registered using the second link. Both of the links are in the video description, and please note that when you go to the websites, you will have the opportunity to complete the form online or to download the form and complete it in your own time so that you can either email it back or post it back to the Tribunal Service to register your appeal. Section 1 of the SEND 35A form asks, who is the appeal about? And that will be either a child under 16 years of age or a young person between the ages of 16 and 25. You have to put the child or young person's surname followed by the child or young person's first name or names, confirm gender and their date of birth. There will be a later section to add parental information, so it's important that section 1 is the child or young person's details. Section 2 asks for your reasons for appeal. The legal test the tribunal will apply is whether or not your child has or may have special educational needs, and whether those needs may need to be met in accordance with a plan. So question 1 asks whether your child or young person has or may have SEN. If your child has a diagnosis, you can list it here and you can attach any diagnosis letters later on in this form. But please note, a child does not need to have a diagnosis to satisfy this legal test. And whether your child has a diagnosis or not, you need to explain how their needs impact on their ability to learn. So it's helpful to think about your child's needs within 4 broad areas. The first is cognition and learning. So in terms of that, try to describe how your child is progressing academically and how they are able to understand what's required of them in the classroom and any barriers they have to accessing the learning within the classroom and understanding what's required of them and learning at the same rate or different from their peers. The second part is around communication and interaction. So how well is your child able to express themselves, express their needs and their thoughts, and how well are they able to understand other people's communication, and whether that is verbal or non-verbal. Thirdly, your child's emotional and mental health, social, emotional and mental health. So how well does your child manage friendships? Are they able to make and maintain friendships? Are they able to understand and regulate their own emotions and understand the emotions of others? And are they able to be resilient and manage their own well-being, or do they have needs in those areas? And then finally, does your child have any physical and sensory needs in relation to their learning? So those might be physical impairments, visual or auditory impairments, but it also includes any sensory needs that impact on learning. For instance, the noise within the environment, the light, any displays around the room, and any sensory tools that they need to be able to access their learning or sensory barriers that they experience. So you describe all of that in this first box. In the second box, it's asking you whether there are any special educational needs that you think your child may have that haven't been fully identified. And that's really asking, are there things that we haven't got to the bottom of yet? And actually the process of an assessment will help to understand more about those needs. So that can often be the case for children who are being excluded or displaying behaviours that people don't quite understand yet, whether that be teachers or parents. So we don't know where those behaviours are coming from, what's triggering those behaviours, or how to support them to manage their emotions and their reactions to the situation they're finding themselves in. That's one of the most common areas where we would find children or young people who we know there are needs for them as their parents, but we don't understand or are not yet able to describe fully what those needs are, and therefore an assessment is needed to understand. Question 2 then brings us on to the second part of that legal test. Does the child require an education, health and care plan to meet their needs? And if there is not enough room in this section or in any other sections, you can use a separate page to describe or to say what you want to say here, and just write in here, see separate supporting page. So in this section, you're going to explain why the school or setting is not able to meet your child's needs without a plan. And for each point that you refer to, you should be able to show some evidence where possible. So you may, for instance, be saying, the school have been working really closely with us, and we have had SEN support plans in place and gradually increased support, but in spite of that, my child still has unmet needs, and the school are at the point where their resources don't enable them to meet those needs anymore. And hopefully you would have SEN support plans and support from the school with that. The other types of evidence you may have in this section would be school attendance records, any suspension letters, any behavioural support plans, or if your child is on a part-time timetable or regularly struggles to attend, that in itself can be evidence of an unmet need, and that is something that you would want to include and explain in this section. Section 3 asks which local authority you're appealing against, so that is the local authority where the child lives. What date is on the decision letter from the local authority, and that decision letter is the one that has said that they have decided not to assess your child's education, health and care needs. And then there is also a section at the bottom where if you have not got a mediation certificate, or if you are submitting your appeal outside of the window, which is 2 months from the decision letter or 1 month from the mediation certificate, whichever is longer, you can tick to say, and you have to explain why that has happened. And it is at the tribunal's discretion whether or not they believe that those extenuating circumstances are sufficient to admit the appeal. With this type of appeal, the tribunal usually makes their decision on the papers, which means based on this form and any supporting evidence that you submit. Typically, there are not verbal face-to-face hearings for these types of appeals. If you disagree for any reason with your appeal being considered only on the papers, you need to explain why and attach an extra document to explain why that is. And then if you have any existing claims or appeals, either in relation to this child or to a sibling that's being dealt with by this tribunal service, or if you have a disability discrimination claim with this tribunal service, then you can tell the tribunal here and you can ask for these appeals to be consolidated or considered at the same time. Section 5 asks who is making the appeal. So if the child is under 16, then it's the first box, it's the parent or another person on behalf of the child. If the young person is making the appeal on their own behalf and they're aged between 16 and 25, they tick the second box. And if an alternative person is making the appeal on the best interest of a young person over 16 who doesn't have mental capacity to bring the appeal themselves, then you tick the third box. If you're in a position where a child or young person is 16 to 25 and does have capacity to participate in the appeal but is being supported to access the process, for instance by a parent, then the appeal needs to be submitted in the name of the young person, so you tick the second box, and on a later page you're going to put in the parent's details as the supporter. So you're only ticking the alternative person box, the third box, if the young person does not have capacity to participate and that has been made through a best interest decision for them under the Mental Capacity Act. So having decided which box to tick, you then fill in the details of the person who's making the appeal, so either the parent or the young person themselves. Section 6 asks who else is involved in the appeal. So this is where you describe any organisations that may share or have parental responsibility for the child. So that might include the virtual school for any children who are looked after. This is also an opportunity to raise any issues that may be going through other court processes at this time. So for instance, if there are issues going through the family courts and if there's disputed parental responsibility or parents who have had parental responsibility moved, that information needs to be raised in this section of the form so that the tribunal know who to include and who not to include in the appeal information that is sent out. Okay, in this section, you're asked to fill in information about the advocate. So that advocate is the parent if it's a child or young person under 16, so the parent details go here. Or if the young person is over 16, but the parent is supporting them to fill this in, then the parent's details go here. So if you tick that second box a couple of slides ago, but the parent is supporting, then this is where their details go. Similarly, if you're a parent making the appeal on behalf of a child, but perhaps you have another family member supporting you, you can put their information here. And then if you have a representative, so that might be a solicitor, a legal representative, or it might be a professional in another sense who is helping you with the appeal process. So it might be a support worker or a social worker. With their consent, you can put their details in this representative box. And then at the bottom, you tick who should receive documents in relation to this appeal. Question 11 asks about your needs, and as this is likely to be heard on the papers, it is more around your needs in relation to communication, so email, phone call, or postal communication. But should there be a hearing, face-to-face or a hearing online, you also need to give any information about any adjustments that you would need to access that process. And then question 2 specifically asks about any need for signing or interpretation to support you to access the process. Section 8 is a really helpful checklist, so you're going to go through here and make sure that you have either printed and posted or attached to your email, ready to attach the following documents. And then section 9 is where you sign. So that is the parent, or if the young person is over 16, it's the young person that signs that first box. And then if there is a second parent involved in the appeal, they sign the next one. And then if you have a representative, the representative signs the bottom box, and that would only be if it was a qualified lawyer who was representing you in the appeal, and you have to do that with their consent. Section 10 is just sending the appeal, so that's to by email send@justice.gov.uk with the email subject line saying new appeal, and making sure that you attach all of the documents that were in the tick boxes on the previous slide. Or you can print and post your appeal and any additional documents to the address listed here. If you're filling the form in online, then you're going to press the submit button after you've uploaded the relevant documents. And section 11 is where you list any additional evidence that you're attaching to your appeal. So that might include things like speech and language assessment, occupational therapy assessment, school reports, attendance records, letters from specialists working with your child, anything that you think is of relevance to demonstrate that your child has or may have special educational needs and that those needs may need to be met in accordance with an education, health and care plan. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this video helpful. If you've got any further questions, please feel free to contact our helpline for your area.